Oh, you can't even see. My favorite part about this shirt is that it has these two bits of embroidery right here so that it just looks kind of like I'm wearing a backpack. But you can't see that when my hair's out like this. So I guess that's fine. That's cool. I'd rather have the floof. Because floof. Okay, today, this is really impromptu. I was not planning this. So, Sam from Thoughts on Tomes has started making kind of a series of, if you're just getting into fantasy, maybe these are some of the books that you would like based on what you already like. So she did literary fiction, and then this morning she put out one on historical fiction, fantasy books that are good, dipping your toes in the water books for people who don't read a lot of fantasy and maybe want to. So, I was gonna put in a comment that was like, these are all of the books that I would recommend for that purpose, and then I realized that I had a whole long list. So, this is a video response to her video. Do people still do this? I know this was a thing back when I was in high school, but video responses, because you can no longer, you know, append them to the actual video, aren't really a thing anymore, but I'm doing one anyway, because I had enough books to. I had enough books to talk about it, and mostly I got the urge. I felt the urge to make a video, and it is technically a direct response to her video, so that's what this is. That was a really long, rambly explanation. So before we actually get into this, I do have two honorable mentions, which are the Temeraire series. I have the one called His Majesty's Dragon, but Sam has the one called Temeraire. They're the same book, but different covers or titles. Honorable mention, she also talked about this one, and she talked about it really well, so go watch her video. And then secondarily, she also talked about Shades of Milk and Honey by Mary Robinette Kowal. And again, she talked about this one. It's also beautiful. I would recommend both of them as well, but since she already talked about that, you should just go watch hers. Probably you already did watch hers. Arguably, she has a much larger audience than I do. Yes, so now that we've done the honorable mentions, let us get into my recommendations for historical fantasy stories. Okay, well, I don't know if there is a specifically important order because I do like all of these books. So the first couple on my list are Outlander by Diana Gabaldon and A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. Both of these are time travel kinds of things. This one is probably the least magical. It's about a woman in the 1940s who accidentally time travels back to the 1700s. It's set in Scotland. They made a great TV show out of it. In general, it's a good time. There's not a lot of magic. The main kind of magic in it is the time travel and how that works. So, it's a good time. Cool book. Cool book. This one is more magic than the Outlander series. It has witches and vampires and daemons? They spell it with an A, so I tend to pronounce it daemons, but I don't know if everybody else does. In any case, the main character is a witch, but she's been ignoring her witchy heritage for her entire life, and she's just a historian. And then she starts working at, I think, Oxford, and meets a vampire, and then the plot gets touched off when she finds a book in the archives that is magically spelled so that no one else can find it, and then everybody wants her to find that book for them, and she's like, no, I don't want to be part of your magical world. It's a whole big thing. Also, pretty good love story. It tends to be a fun time. They made a TV show about this one as well recently, probably because Outlander did so good, to be honest. They're kind of similar. But yeah, those are fun. Fun good times, all around. Fun good times were had by all. So then next on the list is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This book is kind of a Dracula-y book. It is a vampire kind of story. The main character... Well, the story itself is kind of told through a series of recollections and letters and stories, and so it's epistolary in the same way that Dracula is actually epistolary. This one is basically the what if Dracula, you know, Dracula the vampire, was based a little more on the actual history of Vlad Dracul the Impaler, that kind of a thing, and what if he's working some machinations in people's lives and things like that. So this is very much a slightly historical fantasy in the vampire genre. It's set in 3 different generations. The modern, or like the youngest generation, is as close to modern as it gets, but I don't think that it is... It's not modern enough to have cell phones, so just a slightly historical setting. I don't remember if it ever deliberately states the years. This book has been through a lot. This book, it's water damaged at the back because I took it camping. It's got some bent pages now. This book has seen some things, honestly. But yes, so if you're wanting a vampire historical fantasy, this one tends to be more historical, less fantasy. Fantasy light, you might say. Which is kind of the vibe for most of these. We're trying to do some historical fantasy light so that people can dip their toes in. Just a little bit of the paranormal, just a touch of magic, that kind of thing. Next on my list, we have a couple of Victorian fantasies. This one is called A Distant Magic by Mary Jo Putney. It is technically a romance novel, I believe. Yeah. It was reviewed by Romantic Times on the back, and it says it was named one of the top 10 romances of the year by Booklist. I don't remember which year, but it was one of the top 10 then. Yeah, it's called A Distant Magic. This one is about a woman who gets kidnapped by a pirate, and then they go on a time travel journey to ensure the end of slavery in Britain. So they're traveling through time, trying to nudge specific people into specific places or out of specific places to make sure that slavery does indeed get abolished. And also it's a romance. So like, magic pirate romance with time travel and wholesome ending slavery content here. It's light, it's fun, you know, if you're into romance and you want just a slightly, you know, paranormal, historical story that's not really... I don't know where I was going with that sentence, but again, light, fun, good time in general, wholesome content, also some sex, but I think it usually skips over the sex, so if you're not a big fan of super explicit sex scenes, this one doesn't get super explicit as far as I can remember, but I haven't read it in years, so. Next one is called The Paper Magician by Charlie Ann Holmberg. This book is so cute. It is more magical than the others. It's in a Victorian setting, but in a world where magic is a little bit more ubiquitous. There are public academies for magic. You go through the program, you learn all of these kinds of stuff, and then when you finish school, you become an apprentice, and you have to choose, you get assigned, I think, a specific apprenticeship, and each magician in this universe has a specific speciality of what material they can do magic with. And so our main character gets assigned to do her apprenticeship with a paper magician. And whoever you get assigned to do your, you know, apprenticeship with, that's the magical material that you will be learning how to use, and so you are also going to become a paper magician. You basically get assigned the material you're going to work with for the rest of your life. And she's not too happy about being a paper magician because she's like, what can you actually really do with paper, though? Paper is not as cool as some of this other stuff that exists that I could be doing magic with. Yeah, and it's just really cute and really fun. It's a trilogy, there's 3 in the series, they're all very short, they're all very focused. Good fun stories. I really like this series, and it is slightly more magical than some of the other ones on this list, but I think if you're looking for like if you're looking for a series where the magic is more ubiquitous and is just something that exists in society, right? Like it's got the same systems as like if you went to college to become like a computer science person, right? Like in the Victorian era, this is a terrible analogy, but like it's more like that. The last book that I want to talk about is one of my favorites of all time, and it's a fun time. It's a good book. This book, it's called A College of Magics by Caroline Stevermer. This book it's set in, so this book I believe is set in kind of the late 1800s, early 1900s. I'm explaining this terribly. So as far as I understand it, this book is set in kind of the late 1800s, early 1900s, but it's never really explicitly stated like when it is. You just get this kind of vaguely historical setting from the way the world is, and you kind of understand it through that. It's about a teenage girl who is set to inherit a duchy in Europe somewhere. I think it's she's set to inherit, she's set to inherit a dukedom, and I believe the country, like, the geography of the place that she's from is not actually, it's not a real place, it's a fictional country. So there's a lot of fictional politics, but it is technically set in Europe, so it's just supposed to be a bunch of tiny countries and dukedoms and, like, sovereignties in somewhere in Europe, essentially. But she is not quite old enough yet to inherit, and her uncle wants her to become less of a mischief maker, and she thinks get her out of the way while he does whatever he wants while he's the regent of, you know, her kingdom or her dukedom or whatever. So he sends her to finishing school, and I'm just struggling with explaining this book. It's fine. He sends her to finishing school where she is supposed to be learning magic. She's supposed to come out of this finishing school with a degree in magic, and she's supposed to be a witch of Greenlaw. And Greenlaw is what the school is called. It's this lovely historical setting. It's this lovely hint of magic. She goes to this magic school, but arguably the magic is more metaphysical than I've made a fireball kind of a thing, and the magic grows in importance in the story, but for the most part this is a historical story about a girl who goes to finishing school and has to navigate the politics of being the person who's going to inherit this very, very small country. So this is, I believe when it was published it would have been called just children's in general, but I think in the modern day it would be more of a YA title, because it is, the main character goes from, I believe, 16 to 20 in the story. Do I have anything else to say about this? I mean, like, I have so much that I could say about this because I could talk about this book for hours, but in this particular instance I think that's all the important bits. Yeah, I think this one is the most amorphous of the historical settings. It's the one that is kind of the least anchored to a specific place and a specific time. Alright, so to finish this off, I'm going to put these in the order of least to most fantasy for the purposes of because I want to. So, the least fantasy on this list is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. Then comes The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova, with just slightly more specific fantasy happening. A Distant Magic has more of that still. A Discovery of Witches spends a lot of time explaining the fantasy world building, which is why it's in the middle, and it has more of those elements. A College of Magics, once again, starts fantasy really light, like really light fantasy, and ends with significantly more emphasis on that because the main character is learning the fantasy and things like that, but it's a real slow build into that, so it starts in this really historical place, but it is the most amorphous historically, so that's as high on the list as it gets. And then finally, The Paper Magician has the most fantasy in it of these. It is arguably the one where magic takes up the grand majority of the story. The plot, the characters, it's all very, very infused with magic. It's very grounded in the historical setting in many ways, but there's magic everywhere. So that should give you kind of an idea of where you might want to start with these. I think they're all lovely, so I don't think there's any wrong choices in the recommendations for this video. They're all fun and cool and stuff. I like them. Oh, and also don't forget, once again, our honorable mentions from Sam's video, the Temeraire series, and Shades of Milk and Honey. They're both cool too. Please go read some wonderful books, and I will see you in the future. My pile fell over.